I think for the most part, I have got the bed ready for assembly. I've got all the cuts made. I've done some things that we could talk about once we get it assembled, but let's go ahead and start out by putting it together. Here we go. Hopefully you can see everything. So we have inserted the rails into the posts and driven in wedges to hold it, which makes for a pretty secure bed. If need be, I can always take in the future, after it's set up more permanently, and run some screws through there too if need be, but I think for now that will actually hold it quite well. Because I'm looking for originality, I used some of the grapevines that I removed from down in Arkansas just for something really unique, and truly it is unique. I could never duplicate this, of course. I'm using leather straps to help tie it together, but they're really not doing a lot more than decoration, because this is, for a large part, held together with screws and glue. I have doweled this top piece and all of these, both top and bottom, into this top board here and into this grapevine here to where they're fairly secure, glued and screwed in there. These are all tied together here with the screw running up through them, and the leather does a pretty good job of camouflaging that and hiding my screws. Same thing applies to the other end, the foot end. Maybe what I'll do is to turn this around and you might see the entire thing a little bit better. There we go. Same thing on this end. The leather straps are, again, mostly for decoration here. These are glued in into holes that I mortised. Same thing with all these. They're doweled in. This is doweled in about 3/4 of an inch into the bottom and then a good inch into the top. So there isn't going to be a lot of movement in those. I guess it would be easy enough to break one out if I decided to kick one or get violent in bed or something. But I don't see doing that. I'm getting too old for that. So the next step that I'm going to do is, for the sake of authenticity, I'm going to run ropes across here like they'd have done back in the 19th century. And for now, I'm not going to tighten them too much because I got to pull everything back apart. So I'll keep it fairly loose so the assembly and disassembly is a little bit easier. But let's get started with that. I'm going to be using 3/8 manila rope to make this kind of like they would have back in the 19th century, lacing rope across it and supporting the bed that way instead of with a modern day steel spring or box spring. And I'll start in the middle so that I'm not having to pull 50 feet of rope through the entire thing to get it assembled. And in the end, I'll be just tying this off the knot here. And again, once this is assembled in Arkansas, I can tighten the ropes. Now, this is pretty widely known, but for those of you who may not realize it, the term sleep tight comes from this. If you have nicely tightened ropes, when you climb into the mattress at night, it'll have a minimum of sag, and you'll have a little more freedom of sleeping and being able to move around without going back to the middle of the mattress. So, the term sleep tight comes from tight ropes and the way that beds were made years ago, centuries ago probably. For me, I'm going to be using gel pads, and this in itself, although it looks pretty authentic, really wouldn't work all that well for a gel pad. A gel pad's going to pretty much slip right through the ropes, and it would be just about like sleeping on a slightly padded bunch of ropes without a mattress at all. So as you can see, there is a ledge in here. It's there for a reason. I've set up some pieces of plywood, and this is just scrap lumber that I actually had at the outrageous price of lumber and sheathing and such today. Why save every dollar I can. So back in the 19th century, when this type of bed might have been built, they'd never even heard of plywood or OSB, so they had to depend solely on the ropes for supporting a mattress that was probably made out of wool or something like that. I think I'm ready for some padding. Since there is a lot here that I didn't record the progress of, it was painfully slow trying to fit in that grapevine, but I think it gave it a nice decorative touch. I didn't do a lot of recording, so let me pull the camera from the tripod and we'll talk just a little bit about some of what I did here. Okay, again, maybe you can see a little bit better here some of the detail that I drilled into this baseboard and inserted the dowel, and those were glued in place. I tried to keep my fasteners hidden for the most part. There's a lot of actual screws and glue that hold this together for a little more security. But where I did need fasteners, I tried to use something that was pretty authentic. So I've used some nails that I have removed from flooring in some old buildings. In a couple of places here you can see them. And then where the wedge fits into the mortise, one concern that I had is as this wedge is driven down, it could cause this pine to blow out here. So I added a couple of screws into each one of the rails. And fortunately, I had some brass screws that still had the straight slotted head, which helps to keep that sort of authentic look without being ugly. Then to support the plywood and OSB on the inside, I just went ahead and used 2-inch screws, decking screws, to put those in place. You can see them maybe just a little bit better out in the sun there. Because of the differing angles, I wasn't able to drill both of these into the posts. So this one up here is essentially mortised, and the grapevine fits in about 1.5 inches into the post, and it's glued in there. The lower one comes in at such an angle because the angles are so much different. Both of them couldn't be mortised into the post. This one is not. So here again, I used some of the square nails that I had recycled. And then again, we are using that same detail. Sorry, it's a little bit dark. But a wedge to hold that tenon into the mortise joint in the post. One thing that I did not want this to look like something new. So the lumber that I used is all stuff that material that I got by rough sawing some pine logs. True 4x4s on the corner posts and 5/4 by 6-inch wide rails that should provide plenty of support. Because I didn't want it to look old, I took and I roughened the corners and I distressed the sides of just about everything just a little bit. And we'll talk just a little bit about how I did that. So for doing these outside corners, I used a right angle grinder with a coarse carborundum disc. That did a nice job of roughing them up. Actually, probably got a little too rough, so I took a sanding block and just sanded away the splinters. And then for the distressing, something I learned from a furniture maker, and you can actually see the little dents in it pretty good here. I was told that probably the best thing to use to make a lumber look authentically distressed, as it might have been beat up from moving and such, is to use a log chain. So That is pretty much exactly what I did. And that's just a matter of taking a chain. You don't have to hit awful hard. But to smack the wood a little bit. And so that it looks more realistic, do it from a couple different angles. And even take and drag the chain across it a little bit. We'll do the same thing on the other side here. Nothing real scientific about this. And then about the only thing that is left is to allow some age to get to it. And what I will probably do is, when this is not in use, I'll leave it sitting out in the sun to sort of yellow or darken those posts. And then maybe in a year or so I'll give it a some sort of sealant, possibly a light stain, to again make it look just a little more weathered and a little bit older. This is definitely the most fun that I've had since starting this work down in Arkansas. Some of the demolition work gets pretty old and it seems like you're making no headway, but with something like this, here I have something that I think will fit very nicely into the setting of an 1850 log cabin. I'll have a bed that once I get the drywall stripped off of the walls and get this moved in, I think will look pretty darn spectacular, and it'll give me some degree of comfort. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. I know I've really had a lot of fun doing it. Maybe you've learned something. We've talked some about the mortise and tenon joints, the wedge for holding things in place, ropes for keeping the mattress tight. Added some decoration with grapevine that I was able to harvest right from the land. All the wooden posts are from here in Colorado, and I traded some work for the logs to make them, so I've got really very, very little money tied up in this thing, but a pretty cool product, I think, in the end. Please remember, hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed this. I hope you did. And subscribe if you haven't already, and more important than anything is please share with a friend. I really would like for others to be able to get some enjoyment and education if they're thinking about doing the same thing. Until the next episode.